A bill called the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act recently passed the state Senate in California, and it's got a lot of companies worried. What's interesting is that some of these companies aren't the ones that you would immediately think of. A couple of names here might sound familiar to you. The California Cattlemen's Association, the American Farm Bureau, and In-N-Out. So why is In-N-Out so threatened by this piece of legislation that it spent $90,000 lobbying against it just in this cycle? The way the bill works is that companies that operate in California and generate more than $1 billion a year in revenue need to report their greenhouse gas emissions from across their entire supply chains. Emissions that come from other points along companies' supply chains, like their inputs, are known as Scope 3 emissions. While 75% of a typical company's emissions might come from its supply chain, in the food industry, up to 90% of its emissions come from those sources. In this case, the emissions that come from their inputs of meat and dairy. In-N-Out is the only fast food chain that hipsters are allowed to like. While the company doesn't go as far as some in terms of humane washing, looking at you, Chipotle, it's not the kind of company that you would expect to be getting its meat from factory farm, but that's exactly what it does. In-N-Out supplies most of its beef from a facility called Harris Ranch. Harris Ranch is a massive feedlot in Coalinga, California. It is undoubtedly a factory farm. The scale of Harris Cattle Ranch is truly enormous. It produces 200 million pounds of beef per year. It's also known for being the smelly part of the drive along I-5. I've driven the route from Washington to California many times, and at some point, you're taking a nap or listening to a podcast, and somebody goes, "Oh, did somebody fart?" In fact, Harris Ranch, specifically its smell, actually inspired author Michael Pollan to write The Omnivore's Dilemma. David Wood, the owner of Harris Ranch, threatened to withhold $500,000 that he was going to donate to California Polytechnic State University if they sponsored a speech there by Pollan. Pollan has been outspoken about the need to change agricultural practices in America. However, he's not vegan. What he is an expert on sustainable agriculture. Harris Ranch threw an absolute fit about this guy just coming to give one lecture at the university. What they demanded was that other perspectives be presented. The university caved. Fun fact, they actually were concerned that Harris Ranch would pull its support for a meat science institute. Ew. And one of the members of the panel that ended up happening instead of a single-person lecture was a Colorado State University professor of meat science, who they apparently considered the foremost expert in the impacts of animal agriculture on climate and the environment. I'm going to throw a quote from him up on the screen. I'll let it speak for itself. In the letter that the owner of Harris Ranch sent to the president of the university, making these threats and wringing his hands and crying great big cattleman tears, he said something that I think is particularly concerning. He didn't just say, this is not balanced, you shouldn't be having this guy speak, he's a bad guy, he's uninformed about animal science. He said that the university needs to be very careful not to expose students to anything that might be detrimental to conventional agricultural practices. Clearly, the industry, whether you are talking about actual meat companies like Harris Ranch or companies downstream in the supply chain like In-N-Out, they really don't want people to know about the impact that they're having on the world. And I'm not just talking about what animals experience in factory farms. It's one of the single largest sources of greenhouse gases, accounting for a minimum of 14.5% of all human-made emissions, while more recent estimates set it at 16.5%. And you know what's not helping? The fact that even the reports and institutes and bodies and scientists that are willing to stand up and, in the name of intellectual integrity, talk about how animal agriculture is a big contributor to climate change. Such a big contributor that if we don't address it, we will not be able to prevent a critical warming threshold from occurring. They also don't take a position on whether or not people should just maybe stop eating meat, maybe stop doing it, stop killing animals. Concerningly, only a very small percentage of media coverage of climate change mentions animal agriculture. The animal-centric research firm Faunalytics analyzed the 100 most recent climate articles published in 10 national news outlets, including behemoths like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Animal agriculture was mentioned in only 7% of the articles reviewed. Doing the math, I'm guessing that means 7 articles. And they're doing a good job keeping the public in the dark. According to a recent study, most Americans don't understand that animal agriculture is having a significant impact on climate change. Maybe these fossil fuel companies should hire whoever's working for the meat industry. There was actually another bill in California that was meant to end the construction of new factory farms. The bill not only died, not only failed, but it got changed from an initiative to ban new factory farms to a bill saying, let's do a study. It backed off, basically. Let's do a study on the impacts of animal agriculture. We saw this with the tobacco companies for decades. Let's wait on the science. Let's wait. We don't need another study. We know.